The Old West, the lawless civilization that has inspired and captivated many generations with its tales of harrowing outlaws and brave lawmen, who made their mark and helped shape the legacy of the West and reinforce the American spirit of individualism. One of the most notorious outlaws, Butch Cassidy, was born in Circle Valley, Utah as Robert Leroy Parker. He was the oldest of 13 children. His father, a frontiersman working on the California front, was constantly absent from Butch's life. Without his father present to enforce guidelines and boundaries around the home, Butch developed a sense of individuality and freedom throughout his younger years. In his father's absence, enforcement of the family's Mormon faith also slipped away. Once Butch became free from these standard Mormon morals, his journey into the world of criminal activity continued, as well as sparked his love for independence and fostered his rebellious spirit. As time passed and he began his career as an outlaw, Butch Cassidy led the fight against large corporations in the East, all the while staying in the West. Butch Cassidy's leadership among outlaws reinforced the view of the West, and his retaliation against oppression speaks true to our spirit of individualism. However, his legacy is controversial because his success was accomplished through many criminal acts.
To me, the most intriguing thing about outlaws in the West is why we idealize them so. What is the real attraction about folks like Butch Cassidy, Billy the Kid, Jesse James, and what makes them our heroes when they really are bad men?
It was in the early 1890s when Butch rose to power in the West, but in the East, a new power was forming. Large corporations were beginning to take root as individualism and the Industrial Revolution swept the nation in the wake of Reconstruction. Hardworking Americans were eager to leave their mark and change society into the new America everyone wanted. As a result, many big businesses took hold, and many Americans took factory jobs. As well as factory working being a hazardous job, there was a serious lack of freedom, creativity, and respect towards workers. Despite these conditions, Americans still accepted the work. However, they weren't the only ones taking a hold of these new job opportunities. In the mid-1800s, a wave of new immigrants came to America in search of a new start. Many thought of America as a free nation where anything was possible. However, these new citizens began experiencing unexpected oppression as soon as they set foot on the mainland. Not only were the large corporations in New York and other New England states creating a monopoly across the eastern seaboard, but the corrupted American government and their recently established laissez-faire policies did little to regulate the abuses of business. The immigrants felt cheated and lost. They had come to America to live a free life, but had found only those with power were actually free. Their new government evidently unwilling to help those affected by the power play between industrial giants. These workers needed someone to stand up for their rights and give them a voice. And as Butch began targeting large corporations and companies through crime, it became apparent that he was this leader. Their actions became glorified by the newspapers. Many of these papers were distributed across the nation, the stories reaching poor factory workers and others wronged by big business. People began to idolize these outlaws, who were standing against oppression, and their supporters in the East grew. But this was only the beginning of the outlaws' legacy. As a result of the oppressive corporations, strikes broke out as workers sought freedom from the oppressive conditions. As businesses grew desperate, they turned to private agencies to break the strikes. The leading group of these strikebreakers at the time was the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Pinkertons began as a group of strikebreakers founded by Allen Pinkerton, the son of a former police chief. The main focus at the time were the labor riots in New York. In time, they would turn towards being one of the most highly praised detective agencies. So effective, the FBI would be modeled off their practices. Many years later, this agency was finding their paths crossed with Butch and his evasive gang, all the way across the country in Wyoming. As he grew older, Butch began experimenting more with crime. He started cattle rustling all over Wyoming and Colorado at the age of 16, but eventually moved on to robberies. In his heists, he primarily targeted banks and trains, as well as the occasional cattle ranch. His reasons for targeting these specific groups included money, but also that these entities were corrupted and greedy and were considered the bad guys in the West by Butch and other outlaws. Banks often foreclosed on people, the railroads were cruel to their laborers and gained unfair favors from the government in exchange for bribery, and ranchers were often in conflict with smaller ranches over land, water, and grazing rights. However, Butch did not act alone in all this. The golden era of his career began with the formation of the Wild Bunch, the continuous successful evasion of the law, and his newfound fame in the East spreading like wildfire, along with his legacy. As Butch became more active in his crimes, more enforcements were required in the West. The Pinkertons were called to help. However, they were met with an intense dislike, brought on by the fact the agency had worked for the government and corporations in the East, causing the working class to distrust the detectives.
And what's very interesting about it is that with respect to Wyoming, the Pinkertons weren't terribly popular. When the Wyoming Constitution was written in 1889, the delegates said, do we really want private armies that could be like the Pinkertons?
The Pinkertons began their pursuit of the Wild Bunch, following their trail to the Hole in the Wall, an outlaw hideaway where the gang often resided. When news of the Pinkertons spread to Butch, he quickly covered his tracks, but to no avail. In 1901, he was caught and sentenced to 18 months in the Wyoming State Penitentiary. He was released after only a year by the Wyoming State Governor. Since his time in jail, Butch became the leader of the Wild Bunch. They continued wreaking havoc in the West and targeting big businesses. The Wild Bunch was considered the most notorious outlaw gang in all of the Wild West. Newspapers depicting the crimes that were being committed continued to spread far and wide. The public's glorification of Butch Cassidy and other outlaws only continued as time went by. These articles, showing a more caring side of the outlaws, one the public had never seen before, sparked a new idea. Even though their success was achieved through crime, they might be accomplishing some good. They were fighting the corrupt American government, taking wealth away from businesses who had taken theirs from ranchers and commons folk, and speaking out against the oppressive American society that corporations and monopolies had created.
A lot of these outlaws, as it were, become celebrated figures because they are so unique. If everybody was like that, there wouldn't be much left of the West.
In effect, when the news reached the public of Butch's death in a Bolivian shootout in the early 1900s, many stories arose, some of which speculated he was still alive. All these newspaper articles and investigations have only strengthened the myths that Butch Cassidy and the West provide.
The reason that we know about people like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is there were so few of them, and they did some things that were against the law, but they weren't dangerous killers.
It is remembered this way because generations chose to remember the outlaws who helped give society the strength to rebel and question the corporatization of America. Butch Cassidy being set in stone as one of the most notorious outlaws ever to step foot in the western frontier. With the Wild Bunch by his side through his many years of successful heists, Butch Cassidy and his gang have successfully helped to maintain the view of the West as it has always been imagined. A rugged and beautiful place ruled by individualism, freedom from oppression, and a libertarian lifestyle. Today the world is a very different place than it was in the late 1800s. With lifestyles that have become more urbanized and fast-paced than ever before, there is no room for individualism in today's society and culture.
Well, again, I think that's part of the homogenization of American culture. And I would say that more and more we're all becoming more similar in what we think, feel, and how we dress and act.
Yes, the outlaw is coming.
Movies and pop culture, however, have tried to recreate the liberty that the West once provided. This has occurred because the ever-strong desire for the legends of Butch Cassidy has never ceased to exist. The West is still seen as a place of free spirit and rugged individualism, and the libertarian lifestyle derived from the outlaws' rebellion against government authority continues today. The only things that are missing are Butch Cassidy and the other outlaws who once roamed its ever unrestrained plains.